Tonight's core class, we are continuing in the Soul Maps course series. We are in the middle of making our way through the fundamental Chabad Hasidic mystical work known as the Tanya, written by the Alter Rebbe in the late 1700s. And we are in our 7th class, I believe, and we are really following the Alter Rebbe's method for spiritual growth and internal work and improvement. So it's been a process. We're still in the middle of that process, and hopefully we're gaining new tools and new insights into our inner spiritual, emotional, and mental worlds, and how that interfaces with how we behave and what we accomplish in the world around us as well. So just to kind of summarize and lay out what we've been through and where we're up to, because I think the context will give us a better starting point for the class that we are going to be studying tonight. So we began with a concept that we have a dual nature. There are two souls, two drives, a godly one that's focused on holiness and doing what God wants, and then a more self-centered one, which focuses on enhancing and maintaining and enhancing the physical material life that we live. From there, we went on to discuss how we can control our behaviors, even though we may have negative impulses or not always feel so motivated about the positive things that we're supposed to be accomplishing. Nonetheless, in action, indeed, we are able to control and choose our behaviors. Hi, welcome, Betty.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Good to
Thank you for
see
joining. I'm just in the middle of the introduction here, so you haven't missed anything yet.
Okay.
We then pointed out how, okay, it's wonderful and great to recognize that we're able to control our behaviors and choose how we're going to act despite what we may be feeling. But we discussed the importance of needing to help our inner emotions and feelings catch up with our actions in order for us to maintain that standard of behavior. And then more recently, we've been discussing how to keep a positive and upbeat attitude within and among external challenges, which inevitably exist in the living in the world that we do, and possibly some of us more so, some of us less so, dealing with practical challenges. And then of course also internal obstacles that the more emotional kind that may arise every now and then. Obviously this is individual to each person, but everybody has experienced this in some way, and we discussed different ways of staying positive and upbeat and not being pulled down by that and letting that torpedo our momentum and our spiritual and inner work. There is something, we're not done yet. There is something, however, after all this, that remains a bit challenging and hard for us to come to terms with. Because if we think about all these concepts, and we have been perhaps trying to delve into them a bit on our own and try and figure out how they apply in our lives, and how we can implement some of the things that we've been discussing, what you may have realized on your own, and what has also been coming up over the course of our discussions, that no matter how hard we work, whether it's with controlling the choices that we're making in a practical fashion, or trying to refine or improve the way we think or feel about things that we think are important, even if they might be difficult, the struggle always still seems to be there. It just doesn't, somehow, it doesn't necessarily become any easier for us to always be choosing to do the right thing, to always be sensitive to the correct behavior. After all, we are human, we get tired, we want to take a break sometimes. That's just, and then there's also all the challenges that we've discussed, which, objectively make things difficult. So this is, I think, really a tough thing for us to come to terms with. It just sounds quite draining and exhausting that we are just sort of kind of set up that we're going to have to struggle and work hard and resist and push ourselves each and every day for, God willing, God should bless us all with long, healthy, wonderful lives. Another feeling that this can bring up is that we may feel like maybe there is no point, because if I was truly accomplishing something, then it would get easier. I would feel more refined, more enlightened, more connected. And if I'm not feeling that way, then maybe all my efforts are just going to waste and I'm not actually accomplishing anything. And if I don't find myself to be more spiritually sensitive or to be more spiritually aware of God on a regular basis, then perhaps I'm really not doing anything at all. So these are the issues that have really been under the surface the whole time in everything that we've been learning. And tonight we're going to talk more specifically about them and see if there is a way that we can feel better about them, and not only feel better about them, but recognize that there is value regardless of how long we may be struggling or in conflict, in a conflict for. So I'm going to read a scenario to you. And at the end of the scenario, I'm going to ask you a question or two about the scenario. And from there, we'll get into this discussion. So it's Monday morning, it's the beginning of a new week, and you're just coming to terms with the fact that the weekend's over. Now, the real daily grind is starting again for the week. And you come into the kitchen, waking up earlier than you have for the past 2 days, and you're ready for your morning coffee. And as you're coming to prepare yourself coffee, you realize that you're out of coffee. Now, this is a big problem for you because you're the kind of person who doesn't feel awake and ready to tackle the day until you've had that cup of caffeine to give you the energy. So you're really unhappy and upset about it. You wish you had a nice steaming cup that you could be holding in your hand right now and drinking and relaxing with and gearing yourself up for the day with. Your spouse comes into the kitchen and he knows just how you feel about coffee, and he also enjoys a good cup himself. And when he hears that there's no more coffee left, so all his sympathies come out. And you're talking together how good a cup of coffee would taste right now. The conversation is developing, and you're reminding yourselves of all the different wonderful coffee shops that you've been to. And now that you can't have coffee today, it's going to be so much harder to get yourself going. And as your spouse is listening to you talking about all this, so you start to feel a bit better that you've unloaded about your coffee problem, and you sit down to have breakfast. Now, all of a sudden, your teenage daughter walks into the room, and she's overheard your conversation from upstairs. She actually, even though she's a teenager, she so far has no interest in coffee at all. In fact, she doesn't like it. But since she heard you discussing the coffee and how much you wish you could drink it, without saying a word, she just leaves the house, goes to the corner shop, gets a cup of coffee, and brings it home for you so that you can enjoy it on that Monday morning. So, question is as follows. I would like to ask you to think about the difference, well, the similarities and or differences between what your spouse did for you on this morning and what your daughter has done for you this morning. How, obviously they both had different behaviors towards your coffee conundrum, but which one do you think has a better understanding of this issue of yours? And if you don't enjoy coffee to the degree that I described in the scenario, then substitute it for whatever other hot or cold or lukewarm beverage of your choice that you would prefer. Who do you think better understands why you want the coffee, how much you want the coffee, who identifies more deeply with your concerns and your desires? So if you'd like to share your thoughts, please feel free to go ahead. You're muted, so if you'd like to say something, yes, please unmute.
I appreciate both ways, because sometimes like it was very nice that she went to bring coffee in that moment, because in that situation, of course, that helps more than in sympathy or something like that can understand it with you. But sometimes you don't need, sometimes in life, you don't really need the coffee. You just need somebody to understand you.
Yes.
So I think both was appreciated, and it depends in the situation, but I think I would appreciate both. Like it doesn't necessarily you really need a coffee.
Okay, so you're saying that each of them has something that the other one doesn't have. The spouse and the daughter each were able to do something for you.
Yeah, it depends. Like in that situation, of course, like I needed that coffee. I wanted that coffee. So giving me the coffee was maybe better, because that's really what I wanted. But sometimes, when you really like, you're trying to stop coffee, right? And you like talking about the desire, like how good now it will be coffee. So of course, what the spouse did, it will be more appreciated.
Right.
It depends when, but sometimes sympathy and somebody understand us, it's sometimes more than having the actual things that you need.
Right. Okay, so I think you're saying two very important things. If we're going to stick to the literal scenario that I described, so obviously the more important thing was actually being able to get that coffee and drink it. If we take the scenario as an example in general, and we start extending the difference between empathy or doing something for somebody, then there's obviously different ways to talk about it and apply it. But for now, we're going to stick with the very surface level, basic scenario over here. If we want to talk in terms of who was able to better fulfill your need and your desire at that particular moment, definitely it was your daughter, right? Because she was the one who practically made it possible for you to drink coffee that morning. She does not have any of the same capacity as your spouse does to empathize and truly understand you. But with all the understanding and empathy in the world, in this particular scenario, the spouse was not able to meet your desire for drinking coffee just by discussing and understanding and empathizing with you. So we're going to just use this example and illustration to talk about how in Judaism, there's obviously different elements. Okay, we can contemplate Jewish concepts. We can learn about very lofty, Kabbalistic, mystical ideas, which exist very much and in a very broad and wide range in Judaism. And all of that is extremely important and needed, as we will discuss soon. But all of that is not considered to be the ultimate Jewish experience. Even though it might make a person feel very enlightened, very spiritual, very holy, very aware of a godly or higher power, it's still not considered the ultimate Jewish experience. In Judaism, the ultimate, the peak, is doing a mitzvah, doing a practical, actionable, good deed. And this might seem counterintuitive. This might not seem to go along with the conventional, regular perception of religion. And like I said, there's definitely contemplation and thinking and studying and discussing godly ideas and holy spiritual thoughts. We've actually discussed some of them in the study of the Tanya as we've been doing it. And we need all that in order to motivate us, help us feel closer and more emotionally involved in fulfilling the mitzvot, the commandments, and doing all the good deeds that we do. But in and of itself, contemplation, study, inspiration alone will not bring us the ultimate connection with God. The ultimate connection, the most powerful, profound way that we can connect with God is by just simply doing an action, a mitzvah, giving charity, lighting Shabbat candles, praying, any other mitzvah that you can think of. I'm sure there are many, many more that you do in your own lives. These acts themselves connect us with God in a far deeper and more complete way than all the spiritual thoughts and contemplation that we can do. So the question is why, right? It seems surprising because I can give charity and not always be fully present in the feeling compassion and generosity and sensitivity and connection with God, etc., while I'm giving that charity. Or I could be going to light the Shabbat candles, but there was a last minute emergency with one of my children and I'm a bit rushed. So when I actually come to lighting the candles, I want to make sure I'm lighting on time. So my focus is not there as I'm lighting the candles and saying the blessings. So why is it that actions bring us a much more complete connection and bond with God? The reason for that is because contemplating God and thinking about holiness and thinking about spirituality, it's very subjective, and it's going to be different for me than it is for somebody else, and it's going to be limited to my experiences, my perceptions, my feelings, my thoughts, because at the end of the day, as humans, we are limited. We relate to the world in a physical way, and there's a certain point beyond which we're not really able to go in our understanding and absorption of godly and holy ideas. So contemplation and study alone is limited. But when I do a mitzvah, when I do a good deed, God told me to do the good deed, and I fulfill the good deed according to his specifications, according to the way that he laid out. It doesn't matter what I think, what I feel, where I'm up to in my life. I'm fulfilling everything the way I was supposed to fulfill it. I'm connecting with God according to the, so to say, terms that he requested. And I'm therefore going beyond whatever my limitations might be. My action is on God's, I'm on God's page now instead of on my own page. I'm not looking at God from my own page by having spiritual thoughts and inspiration, but I am together with him in his capacity as I fulfill that mitzvah. And that means that the bond and the connection and the union that I'm accomplishing with God through fulfilling a mitzvah is much more complete and much more whole. In fact, it's complete and total. And if we think about this in terms of a relationship, a physical relationship, an emotional relationship that we have with a spouse, with a friend, right? So when you think about the relationship and you think about what you think about the relationship and the way you feel about the relationship, each person has their own feelings and their own way of coming towards that relationship and experiencing the relationship. And it's very subjective. But when there's something practical, actual that you've both done within the relationship, there's something objective there that doesn't depend on mine or the other person's particular thoughts or feelings at the moment. So when we recognize how powerful how complete and how powerful our connection with God becomes through action alone, then the fact that we're struggling within the action, before the action, etc., is much less bothersome. Because yes, perhaps we're having a conflict, perhaps we have to push ourselves beyond our regular status quo. Perhaps we're not really in it, we're tired, we're distracted, we're feeling a bit down, but we're doing it anyway. The action is so powerful and so wholesome and so complete that we're accomplishing something unbelievable, even if we haven't managed to bring our intellect, our thoughts, and our emotions completely into it all the way. We're going to take it a step further. Besides for the fact that within all the things that we think or feel or do, action is the most profound and the most powerful in the way that it connects us with God. Action is also the most profound and the most powerful in the impact that it has on the world. And it doesn't matter how imperfect we might be, and if we might remain imperfect, that impact is equally powerful and equally lasting. So when we recognize that we are fulfilling a very important and fundamental purpose just by the actions that we do, even if inside of us we're not feeling always in harmony and in sync, that also adds feelings of empowerment, of motivation. We're less likely to feel discouraged and downhearted about what we're doing. Because yes, of course, we should definitely always be trying to improve the way we think, the way we feel, improve our emotional and mental situation. But even if we're still working at it and it's taking us time to get there, that doesn't discount or diminish in any way the tremendous impact that we are having on the world. And the fact of the matter is that with every deed that we do, we are perfecting the world a little more, a little more, a little more. And another way of saying another way of expressing this idea is there's the phrase tikkun olam, which we all know about, fixing the world, right? We bring repair to the world. So I'm going to share a video with you which talks a little bit about this idea. And then we will we will talk about making it even more concrete, because obviously right now, till now, we've been speaking in more abstract terms. So let me first share this video.
A meaningful life. Everyone desires a meaningful life. We might say that this is the ultimate goal for which people strive. What does Judaism say about living a meaningful life? The answer might surprise you. When viewed through a Jewish lens, the question about searching for meaning is actually a distraction. There's a more important question that we ought to ask. The question is, what is my purpose? There's an important difference between meaning and purpose. Take, for example, a school teacher. What meaningful things can she do with her students? She may find it meaningful to play hopscotch with her students, or share with them celebrity gossip, or teach them how to get toothpaste back in the tube. But what is this teacher's purpose? In this instance, she was hired to teach math. That is why she is in the classroom, and success in her job will be determined by this criterion alone. In other words, meaning is arbitrary and subjective. It consists of anything one deems to be enriching, inspiring, or beneficial. But purpose conveys that there's a definite and objective reason for an existence. It was produced for an intended purpose and is here for a specific goal. This is relevant to my own life. I can choose to either search for meaning or purpose. In a meaning mindset, my existence is what comes first. Then, because life can feel empty, I attempt to make life meaningful. The meaning that I find answers to my existence. In a purpose mindset, the purpose is what comes first. I have a raison d'être, a purpose that preceded and necessitated my existence. I answer to my purpose. There is often some confusion between these two perspectives because a meaning mindset can be beneficial to others, and a purpose mindset can trigger self-satisfaction. But they should not be confused. The starting points and end goals are very different. Think of the following two wheels. Meaning starts with me, my existence. This is followed by my personal void and then by my search for meaning. It so happens that I find meaning in helping others, but that is largely a byproduct of my search for meaning. It is not what drives me. In this mindset, success is ultimately determined by one thing: whether I have found meaning. But purpose starts with a mission that precedes my existence. This is followed by my birth to fulfill that mission. It so happens that implementing this mission could be personally meaningful, but this is a byproduct of focusing on my purpose. It is not what drives me. In this mindset, success is determined by whether or not the need for which I was created was addressed. A think Jewish perspective is not focused on meaning. It's focused on purpose. When Jews throughout history celebrated their survival, they would link the celebration with an existential question. Why did we survive? Why were we put here? What is the purpose? That was their question, and that can be our question too.
So I think that gives us quite a bit to think about. I'd like to first of all ask if there are any questions on the ideas in the video or so far on the concepts that we've been discussing up until now. So we have this the reason why I shared this video is because I think it brings out in a different kind of way what we were discussing a bit earlier, which is that we might feel disheartened or wonder if we're accomplishing anything when our inner struggles continue for a long time and don't necessarily seem to get easier or diminished in any way. But then we discussed how action, doing something, a mitzvah, a good deed, has a very powerful and profound effect, and is actually a more complete, wholesome union between us and God than any of the thoughts, feelings, and contemplations we could come up with on our own. And then we took that a step further and a step deeper and pointed out that also in our impact on the world, the way that we transform and perfect and improve the world around us is through the things that we do, and not so much through whether or not we're struggling and how spiritually attuned we feel. And the way that the woman in the video was describing the difference between meaning and purpose. So if we're focusing on meaning, then yes, we might feel very disheartened that I'm still struggling. Sometimes I feel connected, sometimes I don't feel connected, sometimes I have doubts, sometimes I have questions. It's been so many years, or whatever other thoughts, for each person and their individual perspective and situation might come up. And then you feel like you're not truly, fulfilling the meaning that you feel you should be in your life. But when it's about the purpose and the mission for which we were put into this world, then so long as we're practically accomplishing the mission, we are achieving something very truly great. And we're going to talk more about that shortly. Of course, this is not to say that we should be abandoning the way that we feel and not trying to improve our thoughts and our feelings. But Tanya discusses that too. We've spoken about it a bit, and we will continue to speak about it in upcoming classes. But this is just to really drive home how impactful and profound and meaningful action is, even if it's not fully accompanied by the proper intention and inner motivation. So if we want to revisit what we spoke about quite early in the beginning of this series, we mentioned how as Beinanim, right, a Beinani, regular, imperfect person who has good parts and bad parts and struggles and impulses and temptations, we need to focus on what we do. We need to focus on how we speak. We need to be focused more on our behaviors and controlling and managing that. And we shouldn't worry so much about our insides, because we're not tzaddikim, the tzaddik, the perfectly righteous individuals, the one whose insides and outsides are completely synchronized and attuned to God and God's desires. Now, it may have come across as, okay, the ultimate is to be a tzaddik. The ultimate is to be completely synchronized, to be spiritually connected in what we do, in how we think, in the way we feel, and in the urges and impulses and desires that we have. But if we have that expectation, we're setting ourselves up to failure, and we need to be realistic. And we need to try and focus on accomplishing what we're able to accomplish. So therefore, we'll put to the side the internal work. We'll work on it to the degree that we can, but we're not going to make it a goal, and we're just going to focus on our behaviors, which might be a very practical way of looking at things and might make us feel like it's easier to accomplish certain goals. But again, might make us feel disheartened that we're not really reaching for the full and complete goal that we should be. But the Alter Rebbe over here in this part of the Tanya really emphasizes that that's not why we focus on behavior. That is not why we focus on action. We are focusing on action because action is much more important to the big picture, to the reason why the world was created, to what the world needs from us. What we do, how we behave, that is much more critical. That's what makes the difference far more than whether or not we have inner struggle and conflict going on inside of us. There's a story with a Hasidic Rebbe where one of his students came to speak to him about his spiritual life. And the student, the Chassid, complained to the Rebbe, and he sort of lamented that he gives charity, but he doesn't feel so good about it because he doesn't feel like he's doing it for the sake of the mitzvah, that he's doing it really altruistically with no ulterior motive. And maybe it's not for him. And the Rebbe responded to him that, don't worry, the pauper who goes to buy himself a meal and feels satiated from the money that you've given him, he's doing the mitzvah with no ulterior motive. Which means to say that obviously in this kind of instance, would you tell the benefactor, well, you're giving it to the other you're giving money to the pauper to feel good about yourself, so that you can say that you're considerate and kind and compassionate and that you think of others, so therefore you should stop? Then what's going to happen? The pauper's going to starve. His family's going to go hungry. They'll no longer have a roof over their heads or heating or whatever. So of course, in that case, it would be wrong to advise the benefactor, okay, well, if you can't do it purely from your whole heart and from your desire to just fulfill God's will without thinking about the way, how it makes you look good in other people's eyes, then don't do it. Don't give the money. We would never say that, right? Because what makes a difference here? Not how the benefactor feels about himself. The difference, the main thing here is whether or not the pauper will be able to survive another day, another week, another month. That effect is way too important to take into consideration the ego or the feelings of the person who is giving the money. And the same is true for anything that we do. Even if we feel like we're not fully all the way there with all of our inner capacities, when we fulfill a mitzvah, when we do a good deed, we are fulfilling God's will, and we are bringing perfection to the world in the way that He envisioned it when He set out to create it way back at the beginning of the creation of the world. And not only that, the tzaddik changes the world in the same way as the individual who's struggling internally. Even though a tzaddik is able to contemplate for days and weeks and months and climb lofty spiritual heights and never feel a negative impulse in his life or her life, if the tzaddik wants to change and perfect and impact the world, the tzaddik has to do that also by action. If we think about our matriarchs, right? Let's take Sarah, the wife of Abraham. Okay, let's imagine her lighting her Shabbat candles, and we're taught in the commentaries that she was so righteous and holy that when she lit her Shabbat candles, they stayed lit the entire week, which was obviously miraculous. So we're talking about somebody supremely righteous, very connected to God. She could be as suffused with godly feeling and holiness inside of her to degrees that we wouldn't be able to even comprehend or understand. But the question of whether she connects completely with God and she has an impact, a transformative impact on the world or not, depends on the actual act of her lighting the Shabbat candles. If she would just stand and contemplate all the tremendous holiness and spirituality of candle lighting, but not actually light the candles. And then you have somebody who doesn't know much at all, maybe heard about candle lighting for the first time that Friday morning and decided to try it out. But they actually light the Shabbat candles with, they can barely say the blessing, or maybe they're even saying it in English because they don't know the Hebrew. The impact of that Shabbat candle lighting is what makes the difference. That Shabbat candle lighting is what changes the world, perfects it, connects the individual in a complete bond with God beyond the individual's personal understandings of holiness, and fulfills what God envisioned by creating this world and by placing each one of us in it, in the particular environment and place that he has placed us. There's a story that took place with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, with an individual, an English gentleman. He was actually very active in my childhood synagogue. He was the gabbai. Very often he would lead the prayers. Unfortunately, he died very suddenly a number of years ago. Relatively young, but he had a number of encounters with the Rebbe, which he told over. One particular encounter that he discussed, where he was learning. He was a student at the time. He was studying in university in England, and he came once to the Rebbe. And of course, the Rebbe spoke to him and asked him about how he's doing and the what's going on in the university, and if there is anything there for the Jewish students. And in the course of the conversation, the Rebbe questioned if there's any option for Jewish students who would like to eat kosher food on campus. Is there any possibility for them to do so? So this individual, his name was Freddie Haga. He told the Rebbe that actually there's a hillel on campus, but it's under construction and the kitchen is now closed. So right now there isn't any possibility, easily for a Jewish student, if they would like to eat kosher, that they don't really have a way right now. But in a few months, at this time, when the construction is completed, the Rebbe said, for these few months, what are we going to do? I mean, till then it's okay that they should have a hard time keeping kosher. And the Rebbe suggested perhaps you should make a Meals on Wheels service, so that the students can order and then, it gets delivered to them and all that. And Freddie Haga got all excited. He's like, oh, that's such a great idea. And and then he starts to get even more enthused, and he's adding, and we can make events, and we can invite lecturers and speakers and study Jewish ideas. And he was getting very excited about all the new Jewish initiatives that he could start on the campus, in addition to that. And the Rebbe sort of held up his hand and he said, those are all wonderful ideas and maybe they should also be done. But right now, all I am trying to do is to make sure that a Jewish student can sit down and have some kosher food to eat next to another Jewish student. And that's what I have. That's what I have in mind. And as Freddie Haga is retelling the story and the experience, he describes how he was struck by, yes, of course, it's wonderful to try and talk to people about Jewish ideas and to inspire them. But the practical action in and of itself is critical and very important. And even though all these other things might be wonderful and great, and perhaps you should pursue them at some point, but even without all of those things, the effect of just the practical deed is so tremendous and so important that it deserves focusing on that alone, and not to lose sight of that. I'm going to share now with you a piece from the Tanya where the Alter Rebbe brings an interesting metaphor to help us understand mystically and spiritually how this all works. It is a quote from the Zohar, so it might sound a bit abstract and mystical, but we will do our best to unpack it and to explain. So let me pull that up for you over here. All right. So, Tanya chapter 35. Let this forthcoming explanation be the consolation to the Beinoni, okay? Because this is a continuation of discussing how struggle and inner conflict shouldn't dishearten an individual from doing the right thing and from having an impact through action, okay? So to quote the Zohar, the body of a man is a wick, and the light which shines on a man's head needs oil, meaning good deeds. The light of God's presence is compared to the flame of a lamp, which does not shine nor cling to the wick without oil. Likewise, the light of God's presence does not rest on a man's body, which is likened to a wick, without good deeds as fuel. So, if our objective is to draw godly light or to draw God's presence into the world and into our environment, we need to understand how this mechanism works. So over here we have explained how this metaphor, this analogy from the Zohar, that the body, just like with a candle or a lamp, in order for the lamp to light, you need three components. You need the wick, you need the fuel, and you need the flame. So in as an analogy or as a metaphor from the body or from our experience, the body is like the wick. The flame is God's light and God's presence. But how's the flame of God's light and presence going to attach itself to the wick, to the person? It needs oil, it needs fuel. What is the fuel? The fuel is good deeds. Okay, mitzvot, good deeds, that is the fuel that enables and allows God's light, God's presence to be drawn down, to rest upon and within the person, and to take hold. It is not sufficient that his soul should act for him as oil for the wick, because the soul of a person, even if he be a perfect tzaddik, does not completely dissolve itself out of existence so as to be truly nullified and absorbed, so that it might be dissolved into and absorbed into the light of God to the extent of becoming one and the same absolutely. Don't worry if this is a bit confusing, I will explain in a moment. Rather, the person remains an entity apart who feels all for God and loves him. It is different, however, with mitzvot and good deeds. The godly life force within them is by no means a separate entity, but is united and absorbed within God's will, and they become truly one in a perfect union. So the last paragraph is preempting or answering the question of, well, we have a godly soul within us. Why can't that be enough to have God rest inside of us? But the Alter Rebbe explains that while the godly soul is a piece of God, the way that it has traveled from God down into the world, into our body, it is now as a ray of light, so to speak, that is separate. It has left the body of the sun. So therefore, it acts as a separate spiritual entity. And while it senses God and feels God very closely and is connected and feels awe and love of God, it is still slightly separate from God. The godly light and energy that exists in a mitzvah is completely united with God. So therefore, if we want to be able to accomplish perfect union with God and that oneness, we do that by fulfilling a mitzvah or a good deed. So just to summarize what we've just, the analogy that we've just read from the Tanya, we have the body, which is the wick. We have the flame, which is the godly light. A flame does not stay attached to a wick if there's no fuel. So what's going to be the fuel? How are we going to draw godliness into ourselves and into the world? Through doing mitzvot. Mitzvot are that fuel. And let's think about fuel. How does a flame stay alight? Because the fuel gets consumed, right? It gets burnt up and the flame is able to keep hold of the wick and remain lit. When we do a mitzvah, part of us is being consumed. It's being consumed and transformed into godliness and into holiness. And let's start at if we think of it in very simple terms at the biological level, when we do anything, and of course also when we do any sort of good deed, we're using physical energy, right? We eat and then we burn calories, and when we're burning those calories burning is the fuel for the physical energy for us to help our neighbor, with the snow that we're all dealing with now, or whatever, something else. We're expending, those calories are getting consumed and transformed into energy, which is directing whatever good deed that we're doing. And that's exactly what we're doing when we fulfill the mitzvah. The physical energy that we're utilizing, besides for physically being burnt up, it's also spiritually becoming consumed and transformed into something good, something holy, and even something godly. Let me show you how this works. I have here a Venn diagram, okay? And if we think about the world, and there are different things in the world, right? So we have on one side, this is a Kabbalistic term, sitra achra, unholiness. There are certain things that are negative, bad, evil. We can't make them good, okay? Murder, anything that this is obviously the way God has written in the Torah, things that anything that we cannot do, anything that's forbidden falls under this category, okay? We're not able, in the current state that we're in, we're not able to transform this. So the way that we deal with this element of things, we just avoid, we hold back, we don't do them. But then we have this middle category known as klipat noga, which is neutral non-holiness. Okay, what's neutral non-holiness? Non-holiness doesn't mean it's not holy, it's evil. It means that it's neutral. It doesn't have holiness within it now. The way that it was created, the way that it exists right now, there's nothing holy about it. What is going to decide whether this particular thing becomes holy, okay, moves over into kedusha, holiness, or whether it moves into unholiness? It depends entirely on how we use it. So if somebody has a good meal, okay, so the food that has been consumed by that meal, it's energy, it's neutral, you've eaten, okay, great. Is the energy from that food going to become something holy or unholy? Well, it depends what you go and do with that energy. If somebody goes ahead after eating a great meal and commits a crime, then that energy from the food becomes unholy because it helped and enabled the person to commit the crime. However, if a person takes that energy and then goes to assist their parents or goes to volunteer at a hospital or in a rehabilitation center, then all that energy becomes holy, becomes uplifted, becomes elevated. So through physical involvement, very practical physical involvement and effort, we take things that on their own are not particularly holy, right? And we make them holy. Okay, what would fall into the category of holiness, just to give the full picture? You know, a Torah scroll, that is something holy, right? Jewish books, the lulav, the 4 kinds that we use on Sukkot, matzah, those things, they in and of themselves, they're holy, because they're objects of a mitzvah, or they have God's name written on them, or both. But most of the things in the world that exist in the world fall into that middle category. So we're seeing more and more from all these explanations and examples how profound, how awesome, how powerful, and how needed our actions and behaviors are. And the way our inner, where we're up to on our inner journey, while it's important, and we will definitely talk about it, it's much less important and shouldn't be the deciding factor in the bigger picture of considering what God created this world for, why he put us here, and what we are meant to accomplish. Any questions? I know it's a lot of ideas, a lot of things all at once, but I'm sure there has to be questions. I don't know if you want to discuss them now or if you can, but
it kind of reminds me of act happy, be happy. Like, you know, I know that's not a very godly concept, but I think I mean, I came in, you know, halfway. So,
right.
But I don't know. I think it's interesting that what's important, you know, is our actions, and, you know, that I'm sure that, you know, our thoughts and, you know, are important as well, but not, I understand that you're kind of saying that, you know, like during times like this, you know, where things are, where we're feeling, you know, pulled down by, just as an example, you know, by being shut in and everything, that, you know, and we don't feel like doing mitzvahs because we're, you know, that it's more important to keep doing mitzvahs, even if we're not feeling that we want to extend ourselves in that way.
Right. Yes. Exactly. I think it puts it very well. So, I mean, there's definitely more to discuss, but it's getting late, so I think we're gonna end here for tonight. As always, if there's any further questions, comments, please. We can and we will continue the exploration and the conversation. Before you go, I would just like to, I'm not sure if you've seen the email or not, but I just would like to share what we have available for Purim. So we're actually doing 2 options this year, obviously because of the situation. So we are offering a Purim experience kit to every person, to your home, everything you need to celebrate Purim. Obviously, Megillah reading the Megillah doesn't read itself, so for that you can set up an appointment. If you prefer not, you know, if you are staying at home now, for people who are comfortable or prefer, we do have an in-person socially distant option. Obviously, that capacity is limited, so we do need RSVP, and of course we will be socially distancing, masks, etc. That will be next week on Thursday evening at 5:45. So if you'd like, what the link is chabadriverwoods.com Purim X2. Okay, so you can just go on that link and choose your option. Whether if you can't come to us, then we want to bring Purim to you. There's still what to celebrate. We still, the fact that we're here and the world is still turning means there's still what for us to do. There's still a purpose. So which we're trying to stay connected to that as much as we can and to remind ourselves about it. So please do sign up for whichever option you prefer. If you're having trouble with a link or you don't remember it, then just text me. That's also fine. We don't have to be so official. But either way, we'd like everybody to experience some of Purim in whichever way they can this year. So I wish you a wonderful week.
Thank you.
Great night. Thank you both very much for joining, and looking forward to what's to come. Stay well.